What I was curious about was how they were going to do it, with teams 1 through 4. Were they going to just rank the division leaders and then stack everyone behind, as like when they do that with the final one, all the conference champions will be at the top. So that's what they did. BYU out of the Big 12, Oregon, Miami of the ACC, Georgia and the SEC. There you have it. Again, Oregon came out number 1. No surprise there. Then you have Miami, who got the 3 nod, BYU at 4, and Georgia 2. So there's your 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then that's where everyone started reacting after. But no surprise there with how they ranked those division winners at the top, or division leaders at the top in 1 through 4.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's kind of the expectation. A lot to be made of where that 4th division champion was ranked, though. BYU, the 4 seed, but they were ranked 9. Boise State, just 3 spots behind them at 12. Certainly interesting to say, because I know it's been said a lot that those 4 byes are guaranteed to the Power 4 champions. That is not true. That is not the case. It is the 4 highest ranked conference champions, regardless of conference. If BYU loses a game, does not finish this season undefeated, Boise State's only loss is to Oregon. There is absolutely a chance that regardless of who the Big 12 champion is, or even if Miami doesn't win the ACC at undefeated, we could see BYU as that 4th highest ranked conference champion and the Big 12 champion not get the bye. Certainly something interesting that I don't know that a lot of people are focusing on.
When you look at, sorry, I didn't know if Elliot was going to pop in. My apologies.
No, you're good.
But yeah, like overall, I mean, again, a nitpicky thing here, and this is why I don't like the 12-team playoff, because there's so many teams involved, and at the end of the day, no one's out anything. I'm laughing at the graphic that I have in front of me that, the first team out is SMU, and the second team out is Texas A&M. This was exactly the point and the concern about the 12-team playoff, is no one is passionately advocating that SMU and Texas A&M should be in the playoff. Like, whoever's the first team out and the second team out, no one's going to give a rip about those programs. There's programs that are at the back end of this at the 12 and 11 spot where I'm like, I don't really care about those teams, because some of those teams are on life support as well when it comes to the playoffs at this point. But when you look at teams 1 through 4, Oregon being at number 1 doesn't surprise me. Georgia at 2. You put Miami at 3, BYU 4. Okay, cool. But where people started to really get critical, of course, was how they started to view Indiana. Indiana, Tennessee, that would be the opening round, the first round matchup, which would be pretty wild to see Indiana have to go play at Tennessee with this explosive offensive Indiana. Everyone seems to be really pulling for the little guy, the Indiana Hoosiers. I am curious, were they the team that you were saying was disrespected, Jacob? Is that the big glaring red flag from last night's rankings reveal as far as how the committee told us they valued or devalued the Indiana Hoosiers out of the Big Ten?
Not one bit. Not at all. I think Indiana is ranked exactly where they belong, if not maybe a little high. I think 8 is absolutely the ceiling for where Indiana should be. They have not beaten anyone this year. Their schedule is absolutely terrible. They haven't beaten a single ranked team. They haven't played a single ranked team. This is a football team that's taking care of business, and they absolutely deserve their credit. But we don't know how good Indiana is until this Michigan and Ohio State game this coming weeks. I know Michigan is not what they normally are, but playing that team is always going to be somewhat of a struggle, at least in the trenches. So we'll see how they fare this week. And then obviously when they go to Ohio State, they're going to have a chance to beat the number 2 team in the country. And if you win that game, you'll be ranked number 1. So all the Indiana fans that are mad at being number 8, complain about the schedule you've already played, take care of business, and it'll solve itself. The team that I think is grossly underrated, and the fact that they're below Indiana is absolutely comical to me, is BYU. BYU has done everything that's been asked of them this year, winning every single game on their schedule in a much, much harder fashion. They've played good teams. They have 2 ranked wins. They've played in the Big 12, and they've dominated those teams. Arizona was ranked at the beginning of the season. They haven't looked great so far. They won that game 41-19. They beat Baylor 34-28 in Baylor. They beat number 13 Kansas State 38-9. BYU has been dominant this year. I think them at 9 is an absolute joke. I think they should be above Indiana, Tennessee, Penn State, and Texas. I would have BYU at 5 with these current rankings. I think this team has played a really difficult schedule so far, and they've dominated. I know no one's talking about the UCF game because UCF isn't a great team this year. They won that game 37-24. They were 3-point underdogs in the bounce house down in Orlando, Florida as an undefeated team. No one is giving BYU any respect. They've played a difficult schedule, and no one's even talking about them being underrated. Everyone's focusing on Indiana, who, should they deserve more respect? Maybe, but you at least have the argument that they haven't played a difficult schedule, and that justifies the 8th ranking. I don't see the argument for BYU at 9. I certainly don't see the argument for them below Indiana, and I think I can make an argument for them above all those one-loss teams.
So I misunderstood. the graphic real quick. I was looking at the seeding with these teams because one with the graphic that had originally come out, and you have that up. Good.
Yes, sir.
No, so I was looking at the seeding in the quarterfinal round, like with the 1, 2, 3, and 4. I didn't notice the graphic over there on the far left. So they did the college football playoff rankings, but then they seeded them after. Okay, that's on me. I misunderstood how they did that. Okay,
it's
so
a tough
Oregon
thing that people are going to have to remember is that the number next to your name in the ranking is not your seed. So as these continue to progress, we're going to see number 9 BYU playing this week. They are the 4 seed. So you're going to have to kind of do a dual screen action here and look at the bracket along with the rankings to figure out where everyone lies.
Yeah, that threw me off. I was confused. So when you said BYU, I'm like, what the hell are you mad about? They're number 4. No, they're not number 4. They're number 9.
And just being 3 spots above BYU or Boise State is crazy to me. You've won 2 ranked games in a Power 4 conference, and they're basically saying it's a coin flip whether you or the Mountain West champion is going to get that bye.
Elliot, I cut you off. My bad.
No, I was just going to say, do you think that the rankings, and I don't know, and this is where college football loses me, when the rankings come out and the playoff committee assigns the seed in this tournament, are they basing it off the rankings? Are they like? Because my question would be if they knew BYU as of this very second ahead of Boise. That's all that would really matter in that case because you get the 4 seed, which looks good for your program anyway. So them being ranked 9 theoretically doesn't really matter because you're getting rewarded with that auto bye. Now, obviously, once Boise and BYU get a little bit closer, it's 12-9 right now, as you guys said, but I feel like that might have had something to do with it. But again, I don't know how that works. It confuses me.
So the buys, those 4 gold numbers, 1 through 4 there in the quarterfinals, go to the 4 highest ranked conference champions, regardless of conference. So you're right. The 9 and 12 doesn't really matter. I think the thing that people are focused on is what I just said, though, is how close they are. With Boise State already losing and playing in a worse conference, they're saying that basically a 1-loss Boise State and an undefeated BYU is separated by not a whole lot, which leads me to believe a 1-loss Big 12 champion BYU, assuming they don't go undefeated the whole way, is going to be below a 1-loss Boise State if undefeated only gives them this much spread. Obviously, it's searching for things to talk about in a first playoff ranking that's weeks and weeks away from the actual thing that matters. I mean, let's remember in 2014, the number 1 team in the first rankings was Mississippi State, led by Dak Prescott, and everyone thought that they were a shoe-in to the playoff and national championship favorites. They didn't even make the playoffs. So these rankings can change drastically. There's many, many big games that have to be played. More big games now than ever because of the 12-team playoff. And the wins and losses at the bottom of the conference can affect the buys and stuff drastically because of conference record and shared opponent with the round-robin scheduling in the Big Ten SEC. There's a lot of teams that don't play each other at the top of these conferences. So we're going to have to focus on tiebreakers and common opponents and things along those lines, which is absolutely crazy.
I tell you what, I mean, look at those. Jake, if you pop that back up on the screen. So, like, this is what's cool about the playoff. The 12-team playoff I was against coming in because I thought it just watered down matchups. Like, Ohio State, Oregon, the loser of that game in the 14-team playoff, I'm not saying that their season was done, but it would have been on life support at that point. Obviously, Ohio State, Penn State play a couple weeks later. Had Ohio State lost to Penn State, they're still probably in the playoff hunt right now. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You want your big your big brands to make sure you give them as much of a shot as possible to represent their conferences in these playoffs, but it just takes the urgency away from the regular season. But regular season be damned if this is what we get when it's all said and done. Like, let's say this was the final one. Can you imagine these matchups, not just in bowl game situations, because the bowl game situations are great. Okay, cool, whatever, at those locations. But for Ohio State at the shoe to welcome in Boise State in Ashton GT, how cool would that be? Tennessee and Indiana. I mean, for Texas to host Alabama, I know it's an SEC matchup now, but for Alabama to have to go on the road to Texas, or if Ohio State had to go play at Alabama or vice versa, can you imagine that these matchups that we never get to see really in the regular season are going to be these heavyweight matchups, these heavyweight showdowns? That part I cannot wait for. I think that's going to be the most magical part about all of this. I don't like how much it watered down the regular season, but I do love the concept of Alabama having to go to Texas. Notre Dame at Penn State. Imagine if that's a night game and you get the whiteout in a playoff game. Holy smokes. Especially with how cold it's going to be at that time. Ohio State, Boise, Tennessee, Indiana. I'm all for it. I can't wait to get to that point. I just hate how much the regular season just seems to be. Alabama's not as good this year. Oh, well. Ohio State, they could have lost to Penn State. Oh, well. That part, not a fan of, but these matchups will make it all worth it.
I think those first-round games at the stadiums, at the college stadiums, is going to be great. That's been one of my main gripes with college football for a long, long time, is that we play these long seasons, 12 seasons, at these meccas to the sport. Beautiful, beautiful stadiums. And then we throw the biggest games of the year in warehouses in Houston, Texas. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You have the Rose Bowl, the Big House, the Shoe, Bryant-Denny, Jordan-Hare, Sanford Stadium in Georgia. Beautiful, beautiful stadiums all around the country that you play these marquee games at for 12, 13, 14 weeks. And then you go to the biggest game of the season and you put it in some warehouse that was built in 2020. It's ridiculous to me. I love that they're sprinkling in a little bit of tradition into the playoffs. I know it's all about getting bigger crowds and stadiums and TV deals and how all the cameras are run and presentation and all that stuff. It's bigger than just football. I like that at least for one step of this 12-team playoff, it seems that they put the football product first. And putting those first-round games at the home college stadiums is the greatest thing that they did, and I'm incredibly excited for it. As an Ohio State fan, I would love to go see Ashton Jeanty play in Columbus. I think that would be absolutely amazing in the first round of the playoff. One thing I did want to ask, I'll throw this graphic right back up there. What do you guys think is the best spot to be in the playoff to win a national championship? Because I think there's a very clear answer, and I think it's the 5th seed.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to play the 12 and then have to play the 4.
Group of 5 team and then the worst conference champion. And then you might not even have to play the 1 in the semifinals because they have to play the 8-9. And just looking right now, that's certainly not going to be an easy game. I think the number 5 seed has the easiest path to the semifinals of any team, which is crazy to say. If Ohio State was undefeated right now, would it be beneficial for them to lose to Oregon in the Big Ten championship? I guess the easier way to say that right now, would it be beneficial for Oregon to lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship? Ohio State would get the 1 seed, presumably, get that first round bye, play in the quarterfinal against the winner of the 8-9 matchup. Oregon would then play the group of 5 team and then worst conference champion. I think we're going to see teams maybe strategize around that conference championship game and not necessarily play to win. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to rest starters or anything along those lines, but I don't think those conference championship games are nearly as make or break as some people say, because that 5 seed is beautiful to lay in if you're a really good football team. The one thing that you do have to risk then, all the other conference champion losing spots are terrible. If you're not a conference champion and you don't get that first round bye and you're not the 5 seed, you are in hell for this 12-team playoff. So you have to be sure about where you're going to land. But I think that 5 seed is the best place to be in for this new 12-team playoff, which is certainly interesting because for all the history of college football, it's always been conference champions are what you want to be. And I don't know that that's the case anymore.
Yeah, like I would hate to be the 4 seed.
Yeah.
The 4 seed every year. Because think about it, you look at it as though you just have to play the 5, but sometimes I think the 5 could potentially be better than that 4th conference champion, especially when you talk about how bad the ACC is most years, how bad the Big 12 is going to be for a while. I mean, you took Oklahoma and Texas out. I know there's some good teams in the Big 12, but BYU is a prime example. That's a good football team. But I think that there are teams who are seated below them that are significantly better. And, Alabama, BYU, Alabama's better than, in my opinion. I would take Alabama, Ohio State. There's so many teams below them. That's the only reason I wasn't a fan of awarding it to the conference champion right off the bat, because you're still not positioning the best teams. But again, it put value back on the conference championship. But Elliot, closing thoughts on the playoff before we move on to buy or sell?
Well, I was going to say before Jacob started that, Ohio State by far is the easiest path. Yeah. I mean, it's not even remotely close. I know Jacob kind of hyped up, Boise and certainly BYU, but there's not a better spot there than that spot. It's the easiest path by a wide margin. I guess if you wanted to argue, obviously being the 1 seed in the country helps, or being the number 1 team in the country would help, I guess. But even then, I just don't think that's the easiest path. And I don't think Georgia as the 2 seed has the easiest path. I think it's very clearly you'd have to play an extra game, but Ohio State is, in my opinion, would have the easiest path to the finals by a wide margin.
No doubt. It'll be fun. And I'm curious to see again. And we'll, on tomorrow, moving forward, we'll take a look at some of the matchups in college football this week that'll have the biggest impact on the rearrangement of this for the next reveal coming up next Tuesday night.
There's a play-in game this week. There's a play-in game this week. Alabama goes to Baton Rouge. One of those two teams is going to go to the playoff, and one of those two teams is not. And it's the winner of this game this week. It's going to be crazy.